Have not talked a ton of college football really at all since the Ohio State Texas game here on the Brandon's World podcast. And that's because, in my opinion, there's not a great team in college football this year, maybe outside of Ohio State. Carson Beck has been a great renaissance story with Miami of Florida. Georgia, in my opinion, with Gunnar Stockton, is not as dynamic as they were the last couple of years. Alabama's got some big wins, but I don't know how good they really are. It does feel like, again, with the transfer portal and the NIL, that college football has become more even. I mean, even Indiana, who some people didn't think could compete with Oregon, they went up to Eugene this past weekend and they pulled off the upset. There's been incredible upsets this year in college football. I just don't know what they mean. It's hard for me to talk about. But I do know that going into the year, I had Penn State as a national championship favorite. They made the Final Four last year. Yes, they lost to Notre Dame. Yes, they got a cupcake schedule en route to the Final Four. But that sort of felt like a big undertaking for James Franklin. And, the quarterback, Drew Adler, who hails from Medina, Ohio, which is very close to my neck of the woods, here where I'm at in Cleveland. He was supposed to be the senior quarterback, and Penn State was supposed to have all this talent, even though obviously guys like Abdul Carter left. This was the most senior roster Penn State had in a long time. They came into the preseason ranked number two, and they really struggled throughout the whole season. And obviously, I think the loss to Oregon, the whiteout at um at Penn State, the home of the Nittany Lions, losing that game in overtime the way they did, and then obviously the loss to UCLA, which was really bad. A UCLA team that has been struggling. Jordan Mailata there, obviously the former Tennessee quarterback is now there, but their head coach was fired before the game, and the abysmal performance that they put on during that contest. And then obviously losing Northwestern at home, you just can't do that. And it did feel like James Franklin was a little bit too over his head. Now, I've defended college football coach forever because I've always said you can't fire a guy when he wins 80 or 70% of his games. But the difference with James Franklin is this was a repeated pattern for him. He's done it basically over a decade. He cannot seem to win the big one. I don't think he has a win against Michigan in his career, and he might have a win against Ohio State in his career. I'll never forget the number two versus number one 3:30 game in 2017. Saquon Barkley takes the opening kickoff back for a touchdown. JT Barrett then responds by going down the field, the Florida Marcus ball down the middle of the field for the game-winning touchdown there. And then, of course, the next year in 4th and 5 with Trace McSorley, they run a draw right up the middle. Never understood that call. And I've said, before Andy Reid got Patrick Mahomes, that James Franklin was like the Andy Reid of college football before Andy got Mahomes, which was he won a lot of games and choked in big games, which was, of course, Andy Reid's moniker, dating all the way back to Philadelphia and early Kansas City days. I think James Franklin's a good college coach. I think he could go down to a smaller school and I think he could win a lot. I think in the ACC he would be the best team. I think he could compete with Miami. I think if he went to the Big 12, I think he'd have the best team in the Big 12, and I think they'd easily get into the college football playoff. I thought Penn State was always a very good school. They were just never on the level of Ryan Day or Urban Meyer at Ohio State or Jim Harbaugh in Michigan or, of course, the golden days of Nick Saban and Kirby Smart at Alabama and Georgia. And this is a different college football field now where I would say there are more good teams in college football than ever before, and there are less great teams in college football than ever before. And Penn State was supposed to be a great team, and we saw Florida State fall apart last year, and they have bounced back nice this year. It could be the same thing. I mean, Penn State is not a bad program. They're a very good program. And with Michigan being down now, yes, Oregon under Dan Lanning is good. They're very good up front. I don't know how explosive they are. They sort of feel like they've lost their way. To me, you got to go for Ohio State and maybe Oregon. And who knows, maybe this kid at USC, maybe Lincoln Riley is starting to get USC back into contention. But the Big Ten is not as deep. I mean, it's filled with good teams. I think there's one great team, and I think this would be a good job. You obviously have to find a different quarterback. We'll see if Drew Adler even decides now if he's going to go back to school or not. It's a very contentious time for this Penn State program, which has always been a good program, never great. And for James Franklin to fill in, after what happened with the whole Joe Paterno and Sandusky, and then they go to Bill O'Brien, I think what James Franklin did to turn the program around was tremendous. It reminds you of like an NBA coach, right? Like a JB Bickerstaff or a Mark Jackson, a guy who's going to establish a good culture, but then you need the next guy to get you over the top. That's where I feel like Penn State is at right now as a program. Just an awful season for them, who started consensus at least in the top three. Some even have them as the top two. A lot of people like me said this could be a Ryan Day situation where Ryan Day was about to get fired at Ohio State. He goes on to win the national championship. I felt like this was James Franklin's best team at Penn State, and they just did not live up to expectations since game one. Like that clip from the Brand's World podcast? If so, make sure you go down there and hit that subscribe button. While you're down there hitting the subscribe button, make sure to also hit the notification bell so you never miss another upload. And make sure you check out all the other clips from the Brand's World podcast right here on YouTube.